What happened when an undercover CEO discovered his most loyal employee was living in a trailer behind the store and being framed by his own coworkers will leave you speechless. Hello to all our amazing listeners. Your wisdom, your heart, and your love for justice are exactly why you're here. Today's story isn't just about tools and hardware. It's about honor, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of one man who gave everything and asked for nothing. Stay tuned, because what unfolds in this small-town hardware store just might restore your faith in decency and remind us all what truly matters. Ethan Hudson sat in the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Hudson Tools' corporate office, surrounded by quarterly reports and hollow accolades. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Sales were strong, customer satisfaction scores were holding steady, and the company had expanded to 18 stores across the Northwest. But Ethan felt a gnawing discomfort that numbers couldn't explain. He hadn't been to a store floor in over a year, having handed off most operations to regional managers. Lately, though, he'd received troubling whispers: rising employee turnover, missing inventory, and growing complaints from longtime staff. Ethan had built Hudson Tools from the ground up with a simple philosophy: treat every customer like a neighbor and every worker like family. But the company he saw on paper felt cold and unfamiliar, streamlined, efficient, and heartless. Something had shifted, and if he didn't get to the bottom of it, everything he stood for would be swallowed by the very machine he'd built. That's when he made the decision. He wouldn't send in auditors or launch another morale survey. He'd go back himself, unannounced and unrecognized. 2 days later, clad in a faded Hudson Tools vest, worn jeans, and a thrift store cap, Ethan stepped into the flagship store, posing as a new trainee named Gene. With glasses low on his nose and a slight limp he'd practiced the night before, he looked nothing like the man whose name was etched on the corporate building downtown. He walked in, scanned the store that had once felt like a second home, and felt the weight of time and distance. It wasn't just the racks of power tools or the rows of extension cords that looked different. It was the people. Faces were tired, conversations were clipped, the hum of familiarity was gone. He wasn't just investigating a business issue. He was searching for a pulse, for the soul of a company he feared had grown too big, too fast. Ethan took a breath, adjusted the name tag on his vest, and headed for the back room. He had no idea what he would find, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done leading from behind a desk. Hudson Tools needed more than strategy. It needed its heart back. The clatter of pallet jacks and the low murmur of morning greetings filled the back room as Ethan, still Gene to everyone else, was handed a clipboard and told to shadow the oldest guy on shift, Frank Delaney, the store's long-serving stock assistant. Ethan expected to be leading the man through daily tasks, but instead he found himself quietly watching a master at work. Frank was in his early 70s, his movements deliberate but never sluggish. He didn't speak much, but his presence was calming, like a familiar melody you didn't realize you'd missed. With faded gloves and a reinforced back brace strapped beneath his flannel, Frank loaded freight with meticulous care, never cutting corners. When a teenage cashier dropped a box of loose bolts, Frank crouched slowly to help her clean up, gently reassuring her with a smile and a joke about his own clumsy days. Ethan observed silently, struck by how everyone, staff and customers alike, seemed to know Frank, even if they didn't acknowledge him with more than a nod. That morning, a young mother with a toddler on her hip approached the tool rental counter. Her face flushed as she fumbled with her purse, realizing she was short on payment for a needed electric sander. Ethan noticed the tension rise in her shoulders, the glance toward the door, and the quiet desperation in her eyes. Before the situation could escalate, Frank stepped in. Without ceremony, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and slid them across the counter with a whisper. No one should have to choose between fixing their home and feeding their kid. The mother looked at him with stunned gratitude, but Frank was already walking back toward the freight aisle like nothing had happened. Ethan stood frozen. It wasn't just kindness, there was something sacred in the way Frank moved through this store, like a man who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't praised, he was, Ethan realized, the quiet ghost of Hudson Tools. Still showing up, still giving more than he ever took. And no one seemed to see him anymore. But Ethan did, and he intended to find out why this good man had become so invisible. As the week progressed, Ethan's quiet observations revealed a different rhythm behind the shelves of Hudson Tools, one far less honorable than Frank's quiet grace. Chase, a cocky young cashier with gel-slicked hair and an endless stream of sarcastic quips, seemed to treat the store like his personal stage. His partner in sarcasm was Alyssa, the customer service lead who masked passive aggression behind an exaggerated smile and acrylic nails that clicked every time she voided a transaction. Ethan first noticed them whispering behind the returns desk, smirking in Frank's direction. "Mr. Charity Case at it again," Alyssa muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Ethan to catch. "Swear he gets off on playing the hero," Chase snorted. "Won't be long. Management's already side-eyeing the register shortages. One push and the old man's out." Ethan's ears burned. What shortages? Frank wasn't even allowed near the cash registers. But that wasn't the only red flag. Later that day, Ethan watched Chase intentionally ring up a return, wrong claiming a customer had only brought back a $20.00 tool when it was clearly worth double. The difference went straight into Chase's apron pocket, with a practiced flick of his hand. Alyssa avoided another transaction after a customer left, pretending it had been a mistake, then pocketed the difference from the till. "System's so old school," she laughed to Chase. "It's practically begging to be scammed." But what chilled Ethan most wasn't the theft. It was the casual cruelty. When Frank helped another customer by quietly slipping her enough to cover a missing $10.00, Elisa made a show of rolling her eyes. "He's gonna go broke playing Santa Claus," Chase smirked. "He's already broke. Dude lives in a trailer. Probably eats cat food." Their voices were low, but their mockery was practiced, rehearsed, and unashamed. Ethan clenched his fists in his vest pockets, resisting the urge to act. He was no longer just an undercover CEO investigating store performance. He was now a witness to a slow, deliberate takedown of a good man by two petty opportunists. The worst part? No one else seemed to notice. Or worse, no one cared. Ethan had seen enough to know this wasn't calculousness. It was a calculated plot, and Frank was the chosen scapegoat. But not if Ethan had anything to say about it. That evening, as twilight fell over the town, Ethan quietly tailed Frank after his shift, maintaining a careful distance. The old man's rusty van groaned as it pulled out of the Hudson Tools lot and didn't go far. Just around the back of the property, past the loading docks, down a narrow gravel path lined with cracked pallets and discarded shelving units. There, nearly hidden beneath a stand of overgrown cedar trees, sat a battered old trailer, leaning slightly to one side like it had grown tired of standing straight. Its windows were covered with faded curtains, the porch light long dead, and the metal steps creaked under Frank's slow, deliberate weight. Ethan watched from his car, engine off, heart heavy. He had driven by this part of the store property countless times without ever noticing, but now he couldn't look away. A dim bulb flickered to life inside as Frank disappeared into the small space he called home. It wasn't just modest, it was barely habitable. A place built not for comfort, but for quiet survival. The next morning, Ethan returned to the store early and struck up a conversation with Tom, a retired teacher and one of Hudson Tools' oldest customers. Tom had been browsing light bulbs when Ethan approached him in disguise. "Frank," Tom said, his tone softening, "that man's a saint. Lost his wife, Marlene. Cancer took her 5 years ago. Sold everything to cover the treatments. Insurance didn't stretch far. After she passed, he took the job here just to make ends meet." Ethan swallowed hard. "He has a daughter out west," Tom continued, "wants him to move in, but he won't. Says he doesn't want to be a burden, too proud to accept help even when he's drowning." Tom paused, shaking his head. "You know, he still sends money to the hospital that treated her. Says he owes them for giving her those extra months. Works through arthritis, never complains. Man like that doesn't belong in a place like that trailer." Ethan nodded, silently absorbing every word, every detail that confirmed what his gut already knew. He had failed this man. Hudson Tools wasn't supposed to be just another employer. It was built to be a haven, a place where people mattered. Somehow, in chasing growth and margins, he had allowed the very soul of his company to go unnoticed and unprotected. and now one of its quietest heroes was living in the shadows, unseen, unheard, except by two cruel coworkers sharpening the knife behind his back. Ethan wasn't just angry, he was ashamed. But shame, he decided, wasn't enough. He would make this right. By the fourth day of Ethan's undercover shift, the storm was already gathering. He could feel it in the way Chase and Alyssa huddled more often near the registers, in the way they spoke in low tones and exchanged glances every time Frank walked by. They weren't just waiting for an opportunity, they were planning one. Ethan, now fully aware of their scheme, decided to take action. He contacted a local community outreach coordinator, someone he'd quietly supported in the past, and arranged for a struggling single mother named Jessica to come in during her lunch break. She wasn't an actor. Jessica was the real thing, a hard-working woman trying to raise her daughter alone while juggling 2 part-time jobs. All she had to do was be honest about her shortfall at the register, and accept help if it came. Ethan had already seen it happen with others. He was certain Frank wouldn't turn her away. Later that afternoon, Jessica entered the store with her young daughter, dressed neatly but clearly worn down. She browsed a few essentials, a flashlight, batteries, a small toolkit, then approached the counter where Elisa stood. As planned, Jessica quietly explained that she'd miscalculated her cash. "I'm about $12.00 short," she said, softly glancing at her daughter. "Could I maybe leave one item and come back tomorrow?" Elisa's smile thinned. "We're not a loan office," she said coolly, voice loud enough to turn heads. "Maybe next time count your money before shopping." That's when Frank appeared, like always not to argue but to help. He stepped beside Jessica, reached into his wallet without a word, and slid a few bills onto the counter. "Just pay it forward," he told her, and turned to walk away. Alyssa, watching the moment unfold with cold precision, turned toward Chase and whispered something. Minutes later, as the line cleared, Chase made a scene at the register. "That's odd, we're $20.00 short again," he announced. Alyssa quickly chimed in, feigning concern. "Happened right after that lady was at your till." She cast a meaningful glance toward the stockroom just where Frank had returned. "He's always hanging around the registers," Chase added, "even though he's not supposed to be." Ethan, watching it unfold, felt his jaw tighten. The trap was now set. The act of kindness was being recast as theft, and the two instigators were about to push their false narrative to the manager. What they didn't realize was that Ethan had already activated hidden security cameras the night before, and their plan was being recorded in crystal clarity. They thought they were about to take down a ghost, but the ghost had an ally now, and their time was running out. The next morning, the air inside Hudson Tools felt unusually tense, as if the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Frank moved through the aisles as he always did, quiet, steady, unaware that a noose was tightening around his reputation. Meanwhile, Chase and Alyssa whispered near the front registers, exchanging smug glances and checking the clock. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Joanne, the store's manager, stepped out of her office with a furrowed brow, holding a clipboard and calculator. "We're short another $20.00 from yesterday's drawer," she announced, her voice edged with concern. Before she could say more, Alyssa stepped in. "I hate to say it, but I saw Frank near the register after that lady left. He's been hanging around a lot." Chase nodded solemnly. "Yeah, I've been noticing the same. I didn't want to say anything, but it's not the first time the drawer's been off." Joanne hesitated, clearly torn. "Frank, can I speak with you in the back?" she asked gently. The older man looked confused, but followed her into the break room. Chase and Alyssa trailed close behind, eager for the moment of execution. Frank stood beside the lockers, hands folded, as Joanne began, "There have been repeated shortages, and we have employees saying you've been near the register when you shouldn't be." Frank's face flushed, his voice soft. "I was only trying to help people who couldn't pay. I'd never take a cent from this store." But the decision had already been made. "I'm sorry," Joanne said with real regret, "but I have to let you go." Before Chase could savor the victory, a calm voice cut through the tension. "That won't be necessary." All heads turned to see Ethan Hudson, no longer in disguise, standing in the doorway in a clean button-down and firm posture. Chase's smirk vanished. "Mr. Hudson?" Joanne gasped. "You were—" Ethan raised a hand. "I've been here all week, watching, listening." He stepped into the room and pulled a small remote from his jacket pocket. "Let's all watch something together." Moments later, the break room TV flickered to life, displaying hidden camera footage. Chase pocketing money, Elisa voiding sales, the two of them plotting. The room fell silent, except for the sound of their own damning words echoing back at them. Frank's kindness wasn't theft, it was integrity, and now everyone could see the truth. As the final frame of the security footage froze on the screen, Chase and Elisa, mid-sneer, their voices replaying their plan to frame Frank. There was a stillness in the room, as if the store itself had exhaled. Joanne's hand went to her mouth, horrified. "Frank, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. But Frank didn't speak. He stood still, his calloused hands trembling slightly, not with anger, but with the weight of humiliation he had just endured. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Frank's shoulder. "You never should have had to defend yourself," he said softly. "You didn't fail this company. We failed you." Chase, red-faced and stammering, tried to speak. We didn't mean to get caught," Ethan cut in, his voice steel. "But you meant every word, every lie, every cruelty." Elisa sobbed quietly beside him, mascara streaking down her face, while store employees gathered nearby in stunned silence. Two uniformed police officers, already briefed and waiting outside, stepped into the room. Chase turned pale. "Wait, this isn't necessary, right? We're not criminals." "You are now," Ethan replied flatly, handing over a flash drive to the officers. As Chase and Elisa were escorted out, heads bowed and reputations shattered, Frank stood in the middle of it all, not as a victim, but as a man reclaimed. Later that morning, in the privacy of Ethan's office, Frank sat across from the man who had once been just another new hire in a dusty vest. "I don't know what to say," Frank admitted, still stunned. "You don't need to say anything," Ethan replied, sliding two envelopes across the desk. The first was a promotion letter. Frank was now Hudson Tools community steward with full salary, benefits, and reduced hours that wouldn't strain his body. The second was the deed to a modest home just a few blocks away, fully paid. No more trailers, no more cold nights behind a store you helped keep standing. Frank's eyes welled with tears. "Why would you do all this?" Ethan leaned forward. "Because your quiet kindness reminded me of what this place was supposed to be, and it's time the company finally lived up to your example." For the first time in years, Frank Delaney felt something deeper than gratitude. He felt seen. News of the dramatic revelation at Hudson Tools spread quickly, first through hushed conversations among employees, then across town as customers shared what had happened. But Ethan Hudson didn't stop at public apologies or a single act of generosity. The very next morning, he stood before the entire staff, including Frank, and made an announcement that would ripple through every branch of the company. Starting today, he declared, Hudson Tools is implementing a new company-wide initiative, the Delaney Standard, in honor of a man who exemplifies the values this company was built upon: humility, integrity, and compassion. The initiative included a living wage for all employees, comprehensive health benefits, and an emergency assistance fund for staff and customers facing hardship. The fund's seed money came not from corporate donations or flashy fundraisers, but directly from the referral bonuses that Chase had once schemed to exploit. The room erupted in applause, not because of the money, but because the company's heart was finally restored. Frank, still adjusting to his new role and the warm attention it brought, found himself busier than ever, not scrubbing floors or hauling freight, but mentoring younger employees, helping organize food drives, and quietly checking in with customers who might need a little extra help. The once overlooked man now had an office tucked near the front desk, a place where people came not for returns or complaints, but for guidance and support. A small bronze plaque was installed above aisle 9 where Frank used to stock shelves alone. It read, "In honor of Frank Delaney, proof that quiet hands build the strongest foundations." Even longtime customers, many of whom had been helped by Frank without ever knowing his name, returned to shake his hand and share how his small acts of kindness had rippled through their lives. And though Frank no longer needed to work, no longer needed to scrape by in silence, he showed up every morning with a thermos of coffee and a humble nod, just like always. For him, this wasn't about recognition, it was about purpose. But for the company and the community it served, it was about something greater. The realization that one person's quiet compassion can rebuild not just a man's dignity, but an entire company's soul. Weeks passed, but the impact of what had unfolded at Hudson Tools didn't fade, it deepened. Frank Delaney, once the quiet stock assistant in the shadows, now arrived each morning not out of necessity but from choice. He wore a new badge, community steward, but his humility remained unchanged. He still brought coffee for the crew, still offered a warm nod to every customer, and still took time to listen when someone looked like they needed to talk. He had traded his battered trailer for a small, sunlit house just 3 blocks away, where his daughter now visited often, relieved to see him finally cared for. Ethan Hudson, too, was different. He no longer led from behind spreadsheets, but from within the store, checking in weekly, walking the aisles with sleeves rolled up, remembering names, and learning stories. One quiet morning, Ethan stepped through the front doors and found Frank near aisle 9, helping a teenager find the right drill bit. As their eyes met, Ethan gave a small nod, and Frank nodded back. 2 men bound not by title or paycheck, but by purpose. Above them, the bronze plaque gleamed in the morning light. In honor of Frank Delaney, kindness is never wasted. Customers stopped to read it, some placing their hands over their hearts, others smiling through tears. What had started as a secret investigation had become a full-blown restoration of values. Hudson Tools wasn't just a hardware store anymore. It was a testament to what could happen when one man's quiet goodness is finally recognized, protected, and celebrated. And every time a customer walked down aisle 9, they didn't just find tools for their homes. They found a reminder of what it meant to build something lasting. Respect, compassion, and dignity for all. The story of Frank Delaney and Hudson Tools is a powerful reminder that the soul of any company or community isn't found in profits or policies, but in people. Frank, an aging man quietly living behind the store he served, embodied integrity, kindness, and quiet sacrifice. Despite his struggles, he chose compassion over bitterness, helping others even when he had little for himself. Yet his decency made him a target in a workplace that had lost sight of its value. When the truth came to light, it wasn't just about clearing Frank's name. It was about waking up a company that had drifted too far from its founding purpose. The lesson is clear. Never underestimate the power of quiet goodness, and never allow noise, youth, or ambition to drown out those who lead with humility and heart. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it scrubs dishes, sometimes it stocks shelves, and sometimes it lives in a trailer behind a building it helped build. But when it's finally seen, acknowledged, and honored, it can change everything. Frank didn't just save customers, he saved a company's conscience. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that character is the true foundation upon which great things are built.